Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of the Co-operative Republic of Guyana, Honorable Prime Minister, Brigadier Mark Phillips, Honorable Vice President, Dr. Bharat Jagdeo, Minister of Natural Resources, the Honorable Vikram Bharat, Honorable Ministers of Government, senior government officials, it is a pleasure to greet you this afternoon. I also take this opportunity to extend greetings to the leaders and representatives of the Private Sector Commission, the Guyana Manufacturing and Services Association, AmCham Guyana, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, the Tourism and Hospitality Association, the leaders and representatives of the Regional Chambers of Commerce, and representatives of the international oil companies, contractor and subcontractor companies operating within the petroleum sector. Greetings are also extended to the leaders and representatives of other stakeholder organizations across the country, joining us this afternoon via live stream using the ICT platform of the Ministry of Natural Resources. And greetings to all participants. Again, I say it's indeed a pleasure to welcome you today at this, our local content policy stakeholder consultation session. More so, as I have the Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali. We are all reminded of the guidance and policy directions laid down by His Excellency since his inauguration and at various engagements since, in relation to the development of Guyana as a whole, and in particular in relation to the holistic trajectory of our petroleum sector, on key matters such as good governance, accountability, transparency, and serving the interests of the people, serving us faithfully, regardless of race or creed. These are matters which have underpinned the subject of this afternoon's engagement. I quote from one such engagement: "As your president, I am unequivocally committed to governing our country and our people with attention, without discrimination, and with every attention to fairness and equity." Local content is well recognized and agreed to be a key pillar upon which the advancement of our nation rests. Again, I quote His Excellency from his inaugural speech to the 12th Parliament. "We are faced with what Barack Obama described as the urgency of now. We want our factories humming with production. We want our people back at work. We want our businesses turning profits and investing in new and expanded enterprises. We want a Guyana that rises like the fabled phoenix from the ashes of neglect, spreading its wings and soaring proudly to the heights that should long ago have been its perch. And we want every Guyanese to be part of that rising, sharing in its transformation and its resulting benefits. This is no young man's dream, nor is it an old man's vision. It is a reality within our grasp as a nation. What we need is the will to seize it together. And that is what I invite every Guyanese, every man, every woman, and every child to do. Guyanese must not be second-class citizens in the oil and gas sector in our own country. They must be its principal beneficiaries, ahead of all and second to none." End of quote. On this note, it is my pleasure and honor to invite you all to stand as we welcome to the podium His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of the Co-operative Republic of Guyana, our President, to deliver his address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan. Those are very kind words. Vice President, Prime Minister, members of industry, commerce, members of private sector organizations.
I don't know if we have any representative from the diplomatic community, but if there are any, let me welcome you and thank you for being part of this process. Today we are meeting at an important time when we will be refining, with your input, the people's input, our local content policy. And this is a commitment that we made during the elections, that very swiftly we'll move to a local content policy, but more importantly, a local content policy that is driven by the stakeholders and the people of our country. And today, not only here, but those who are joining us and those who will continue to join the process over the next month, we will have a participatory approach in which we'll have a document that belongs to all of us and belongs to Guyana. On this note, I would like to thank the Vice President, the Minister, the local team that we put together, led, of course, by Sham Nokta and all the other individuals who were part of that team. I want to thank you sincerely for the work you have done. I want to thank all the private sector organizations and other stakeholders who took the time to submit documents and made presentations. I want to thank you sincerely for your efforts and in making this a priority. And I ask you to please put your hands together for all of these individuals and organizations. This will not be our first engagement on local content. Local content is not meant to be static. As our country continues to grow and change in nature, different aspects of the economy will evolve. The document or local content policy has to continuously evolve too with the development of our country. And that is why, for us, the local content policy has to be a living policy. It has to be a policy that is flexible, a policy that is responsive, a policy that has great clarity, a policy that sets the framework through which all those who are engaged, not only in the oil and gas sector, but the forward and backward linkages of the oil and gas sector, all would understand fully what are their responsibilities to local content. That is very important. For us to establish with great clarity the responsibility of every stakeholder to local content, a type of local content, and a type of measurement and evaluation that will be done to ensure that they are operating within that policy framework and guideline. We have said a lot already about local content from the government perspective. In many of my addresses, I addressed this issue. And today really is to hear from the various stakeholders mostly. But I want to say that local content is not about oil and gas alone. If we are under the mistaken belief that local content is about oil and gas alone, then we'll be commencing the development of this document from a wrong perspective. Whilst the oil and gas sector would be one that would be critically targeted in the local content strategy, the local content strategy is an overarching strategy that will cover every single sector of our development as a country. That is why you will see there's focus on the insurance industry, the banking sector, the development of manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity, rentals, human resource transformation, training and development, not only in the areas of oil and gas, but in all the other emerging areas that will be part of our economy in which we need to build capacity. Local content is not only about doing business and increasing the level of business that will come to local companies.
Local content is about building the capacity of local companies, giving them the capability so that they can become globally competitive, so that our business environment can become globally competitive, so that they can have the necessary transformation that would lead them to the next level of business development. So global competition is also a critical part of the local content that we're talking about. And for that, the government has some responsibilities, which we are already committed to. Those responsibilities include building a stable macroeconomic environment, improving the ease of doing business, improving the efficiency of government institutions, improving our legislation to meet the future demand of our economy, to respond to the future needs of our economy, building the institutional capacity. These are all critical parts of the local content. It's about human transformation. And we are not here without recognizing the difficulties. We know that there is an existing gap. There is an existing gap in levels of capital, an existing gap in human resource capacity, an existing gap in technology. We recognize that there is an existing gap. But in recognizing that there is an existing gap, we have to put the systems in place now to quickly bridge that gap. But in the intervening period, whilst we are bridging this gap, we are saying that we also have to define a space for local business and local participation, even whilst we bridge the gap. Very important. And that is why businesses that are coming in, we are not here to say that we want to minimize foreign investment. That will be to our detriment. But we want the investors who are coming in to recognize that through a legislative mechanism, through regulations, through institutions, that they have to commit to local content. And not only commit to local content, but we are going to move with you in setting targets as to the levels of local content. And then we have to define what is local content too. Local content can't just be incorporating a local business. So these are all attributes of the local content that sometimes we miss, especially if you look at the discourse in the media. It is focused particularly only on business opportunities. And for this reason, the local content policy that we're contemplating must have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And all of this has to be done within a framework that will require the establishment of a new mechanism that will support the development of local content. So today, we are tasked with crafting a policy that is responsive to the immediate needs of our country. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not limiting this to oil and gas. It is an immediate need. And look, frankly, Guyana is one of the few countries where we have an easier environment for foreign investment. If you look right in the region, in CARICOM, land ownership is very difficult. For a matter of fact, land ownership is impossible. So there is a certain level of business from the oil and gas sector, from the forward linkage and the backward linkage of the oil and gas sector, that we have to carve out and say, these areas are completely for local suppliers, completely for local suppliers. And I've said publicly that there are some, I don't want to say lower levels of services, but there are some services that we have done all our lives in Guyana. Brokerage services, for example. We have services, Guyanese who are investing in for the rental opportunities, office space and complexes. Part of the construction boom that the investors are hoping will be supported by the demand from oil and gas. And these are the low-level investors. These are not the sophisticated investors. So we have to identify that level of investors too. And in the local content, policy, and framework, ensure that they are protected. Ensure that the space is there for them. And this brings me now to the more sophisticated businesses in Guyana. I've said this before. For too long, we have operated at the family level in business development in Guyana. We have to also understand that things are changing, and this approach needs adjustment. And I've called on the private sector, and I'm very, very happy that the response has been good, to now combine their efforts into consortiums. It enhances your capital, and it creates a new vehicle through which you can go after the larger scale type of development. Very recently, the Vice President and I met with the livestock, all the major livestock producers. And we said to them, listen, how is it we can create opportunities for other players, whilst at the same time reduce your input costs that comes in from export, which is the production of corn and soya and protein-based material. And we are coming up with a formula that in 3-4 years would see us capable of having the input to the feed production 100% local, produced local. The development of a logistics business chain. Very, very important, not only for oil and gas, but for the future of our economy. How is it we ensure that businesses understand the opportunities that lies ahead? Because if you don't understand the opportunity that lies ahead, then you will not be able to position yourself to make use of those opportunities. And it's for this reason, over the last 5 months, we are spending so much time to bring clarity to the vision as to where we want Guyana to be. We are spending so much time to lay out the development agenda. The Minister of Finance recently, and he deliberately, it was not just that he wanted to stand up and present for 4 hours, but it was very important that he detailed the agenda of the country moving forward so that Guyana understands where we want to be. It is the same thing with the gas to shore project. When commentators speak about the gas to shore project, they focus only on one component of the project. Gas to shore is not only about a power plant. We can't speak about the possibility of oil and gas in giving us a modern, globally competitive manufacturing sector and industrialized development for industrialization, and then say we don't develop the key asset to enable us to do that. We have to develop the key assets to create the opportunities. And this is where the local private sector must look too. We've made it very clear that from the resources of oil and gas, we want to create a new economy that is well diversified, not only the expansion of agriculture and our traditional crops. We're talking about making Guyana a regional hub for health services, educational services. We have been engaging beyond the 20,000 scholarships on the possibility of having, and it's gone beyond the possibility, we're hoping very soon we can have definitive position on this, an internationally recognized oil and gas sector, training institute in Guyana. These are all things that are necessary in supporting local content. We recognize too that in the oil and gas sector, there is a need for international certification in every area. Whether you're a driver, you have to be a driver who is also a first responder. And we are willing to make those investments in our human capital to meet those opportunities. But in doing so, we have to have a policy that protects those opportunities for those persons we are training to meet the opportunity. Then, for local content to be successful, as the Vice President recently said, we have to be able to have proper zoning. We can't hold back the development of the investors by not having zoning for where the waste facility will go, or zoning where different aspects of the business will go. It's very critical. That is why in our master plan, this is also important, and it's linked to the local content policy. So that we don't create an environment in which any of the operator has the excuse to say, well, you don't have the institutional arrangement in place, so we have to go to X, Y, and Z place to provide that service. We have to be bold in making the investment, creating the environment, and creating the opportunity for those businesses to be driven back to Guyana and remove the excuse that we don't have the capacity and capability. That is also very important for us. And you know how we operate as a government by now. We are very frank. We are not here to massage the equation. We are here for a very open, and that is why the panel that would lead today the discussion would be led by the Vice President and the Minister themselves. We are here to have a very frank discourse with all the stakeholders, all the participants. Because that is the only way we can create the ownership for the local content policy. Very important. You can have the best policy, but if you don't have ownership of the policy from the people who participate in the policy, then we will not be moving forward. So we have to create that ownership. And that is another important aspect. Then, an important part of the local content policy is accountability. And the government has an important responsibility in ensuring there is accountability through the audits, through the monitoring and evaluation. So that also will be part of the local content policy. How do we determine whether you're in compliance of the policy or not? And how do we hold you accountable to the policy? Very important aspect of the local content policy that we'll be discussing. And as I said before, the issue of target setting, another important aspect of the local content policy. So today, as I said, I don't want to be too long. This is your forum. But I want to say that This is a local content policy that will be very different because it goes beyond the identification of opportunities. It speaks about the mechanism to get the results of those opportunities. It speaks not only about the responsibility of the private sector, but the responsibility of the government. Not only the responsibility of the operator, but the monitoring and evaluation of that responsibility. It's not only talk about the opportunities, but about building the human capacity to get those opportunities. But importantly, in closing, I want you to understand the local content policy is set in a national development framework. It is not set in oil and gas. It is set in a national development framework of our country. That is very important for us to understand. Very, very important. Guyana is not about oil and gas. Our future is not only about oil and gas. Oil and gas gives us that catalyst, that push to move the other sectors forward. So we do not intend for this discussion to be narrowly positioned only on oil and gas. We recognize it's a key component, but the local content policy is set in a national development framework. And in the budget debates, every minister will outline very clearly the vision of that sector for the next 5 years. With these few words, thank you, and we look forward for a fruitful and productive session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The plenary session is now open. I therefore hand the proceedings over to the Honorable Vice President, Dr. Jacquio, and Honorable Minister Barat, who will lead this session and provide further guidance on the way forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me thank His Excellency for laying out his vision as to how we should approach local content in Guyana. As he pointed out, that this local content will encompass actions and policies across the government and in every sector. Today, we are here because we made a promise that particularly in the oil and gas sector, we will have a local content policy to guide the actions of those who are investing in this area. And it starts out with the first principle, the overarching philosophy for the development of this sector, which is sharing prosperity. We cannot develop this sector where the bulk of the benefits redound to only to the investors, and Guyanese do not see any improvement in their lives, or they cannot share that prosperity. The resources belong to them, and they have a right to share this prosperity. Now, in moving forward, we also, and we have made it clear that the part of getting to that point of shared prosperity or getting more resources for the country will be a new PSA, production sharing agreement, because we believe that the current PSA is stacked in favor of the oil and gas companies. We believe we took a conscious decision as a political party and our government that we will not renegotiate that contract because we believe in the sanctity of contracts, but we made it very clear to the companies in the sector that any future PSA, and for all of those companies who will have to come to the government to negotiate a PSA, the conditions will be very different, and they would evolve in the direction of greater benefits to Guyana. So those tend to be benefits that flow directly to the Treasury. We want to assure the companies, notwithstanding what I just said there, that we're not going to be populist. We're not going to make it so unrealistic, the PSA, that it becomes a disincentive for them to invest here. When we believe the sector can produce enough remuneration for both and healthy remuneration for the investors, but yet contribute more to Guyanese and their development. So we are not going to become populist because you have a lot of populism going on now. People just make some wild statements without being able to substantiate those. There must be fairness and equity, again, guiding these expectations on both parties. We understand that in Guyana, there may be limited capacity in some sectors, but we need legislation and a clear policy to guide and to demand, force the companies in this sector to act differently, because from what we've observed is that many have done so almost instinctively and based on maybe common experience working with contractors of a large nature and subcontractors around the world, but they believe that this is the easiest mode of getting things done. And that may be easy, but we are not going to allow ease of work for the oil companies to take away opportunities from Guyanese. So the oil companies would have to understand that they have to work differently. They have to work differently in Guyana. And so, for example, as the president pointed out, we made it clear when we were in opposition, we said to Exxon and many others that the payment system, it's not just about local content, but the payment system where you have 90 days credit. Small companies cannot extend 90 days credit or 60 days credit to the big companies. You have to have a payment system evolving that would allow at least services and goods supplied below maybe a threshold, that those have a different form of payment where people get paid within 30 days, etc. The big companies, subcontractors with healthy credit ratings and deep pockets can afford to do that. Small companies cannot. So it's not, I just learned a few days ago that you have companies here coming to Guyana, hiring doctors, paying them local rates, and then possibly billing the oil companies the US rates, and then that comes out of cost oil. But the local doctors are getting a fraction, although they're providing the service, but it's organized through someone else. They're getting a huge payments. And this has gone on for a whole range of services. When we look at what they bill the company for and what prices are paid when the subcontractors farm it out to to Guyanese, what prices are paid to them. It's a fraction of what they get paid. So a lot has to change. We know we cannot build, we don't have the capacity to build the FPSOs. But for Christ's sake, we have the capacity to supply taxi services and vehicle services. And our people have enough money to build good quality homes to rent to the oil companies and a number of these things. That's where the companies will have to utilize local resources. That is for us to get up to even a tiny threshold of overall expenditure of these companies when you consider the things that we cannot do here in Guyana. And so we're going to have special carve-outs, of course not substandard carve-outs, and not uncompetitive rates too, not to corner the market for Guyanese where they charge unrealistic rates, but also they have to find a place to go with this industry. And this will involve every sector. We do not want to be rigid in setting thresholds without consultations with the sectors and with the companies themselves, because many of these things are very nuanced. And so, for example, the insurance sector, what share, if we want part of that business to come here, what share realistically can come here given the state of our own insurance company? How much more would our banking system be used? How much flow through our banking system will come so it can, not all the funds are paid from abroad. These things in construction and subcontracting, and also if the subcontractors are getting concessions, how they utilize those concessions to bid on other types of work that local people who are bidding on similar work, they don't get similar concessions, so they're placed at a competitive disadvantage. All of these things we have to go through in great detail. We may not be able to do so in the legislation because it might be rigid there, but definitely through regulations from time to time. So we may pass a core legislation and then improve these or move the targets so the targets could move over time through in a graduated way through the regulations. This is absolutely necessary. Our people have to feel this prosperity. They have to be trained in the sector. There has to be more spent on training of our people, and it's on building capacity, even the capacity to monitor the industry. There has to, as the president pointed out, there has to be a rigid compliance and monitoring all of these things, because we can't just leave it to the goodwill of individuals. And with the best intention, often this doesn't happen. And so the local content policy is not created to disincentivize investment, but it's a promise that we made to our people about shared prosperity. And this has to happen. And this policy would be bolstered by, as I said before, in the future, the evolution of the PSA and other things. I wish to thank Sham Noctor and Anthony Paul and Carl Greenage and Floyd Haynes and Kevin Ramnarine. These were people who worked, the president put together that panel, and they worked on the consultations and putting together the first document. And then in-house within the ministry, they tried to pull this into a policy. Both documents are shared online. You'd have an opportunity to, the consultation shall remain open for 1 month. We will have, anyone, all Guyanese with we'd advertise it in the newspapers. They can come online and share their views. You can continue doing so if you don't wish to do so here today formally. We will meet with the oil companies to see that we have that nuanced approach moving forward so that we don't put in here something that's totally unrealistic and cannot be achieved. We want to move this forward as a national. The oil companies, all in the leadership, when we met with them, they all said they believe in the vision of shared prosperity too. So this is not about fighting each other. This is about moving forward. But Guyanese have to benefit more from this sector. And then, of course, the president's vision about the broader sector, the national economy, more local content in that too. But today, I think we're going to move forward this component as it relates to the oil and gas industry. So with those few words, I just want to open the floor for comments and for suggestions, where the consultation is formally open here. As I said before, you don't have to. The president pointed out about definitions too. One thing that we have to be very clear is that the definition of what a local company is to a local individual, that it cannot be played. It can't be a token sort of thing, as he said. You can't just incorporate a local company and think, that you suddenly qualify for local content. There has to be some real benefits here to our people. And so we're still flexible, open on that. And so we'd like to hear you a bit more about that, on that issue too. But yes, so just let us know the name, the organization, so we can make the notes. But the floor is now open. Thank you very much once again for coming. Carville Duncan? Oh, sorry, I missed Carville Duncan was part of the panel too. Thank you very much, Carville.
Good afternoon, President, Excellency, Dr. Irfaan, Honorable Prime Minister, and the Vice President. For those in the room who may not know me, my name is Nicholas Boyer. I'm the Chairman of the Private Sector Commission. Thank you for the invitation today. The Private Sector Commission wishes to thank Mr. Sham Nakhtar, who is a compadre of ours as the President of the Manufacturing Services Association now. He did some excellent consultations with us in the panel, and we were able to provide feedback because indeed we've had member companies who have experienced those hardships you talked about, access to financing, being startups and facing with long credit periods from oil and gas receivables. For us, we also welcome what you talked about, President, with the policy being something that is akin to more of national development and not just for the oil. The policy, as you're talking about today, is for the oil sector, but this is part of something that you're looking at nationally as well. I'd like to also add that within the Private Sector Commission, we will digest the document that is now proposed in response, let's say, to our comments, the report, and the advisory panel, and make formal recommendations. But in my review of the document last evening and over the weekend, I think it's a step in direct direction, building on the policy that was done last January. When that policy was put out last January, a lot of us still were somewhat excited, but now over the past year still suffered from some of the things that you mentioned just now in your opening remarks. And so for us, this policy represents a further step in the right direction, so we're supportive of it. Thank you.
Mariam Prashad, President of the Guyana Oil and Gas Energy Chamber. I must say that the government must be congratulated for the much enhanced draft local content policy and for incorporating the many suggestions from we the stakeholders. What happened this afternoon is two very important things. One, the President spoke about flexibility, and the Vice President spoke about rigid, not being rigid. In fact, those two signal words come outside of the box. I must congratulate the local content panel and also the Ministry of Natural Resources for their second draft. But much of what we want to raise this afternoon encompasses what the President and Vice President said. Local content must not affect the non-oil sector. And listen to this scenario briefly. When oil firms need qualified people not available on the market and are not allowed to import, they will raid local firms by paying higher salaries. To hold on to qualified staff, the local firm raises their salaries and passes the cost on. Inflation results. It's already happening. Local content policy must make room for incorporating qualified people. We must have a delicate balance. Policies must not only be restricted to Guyanese workforce, but must also include the skills in the Guyanese diaspora who have the necessary skills and want to remigrate back to their homeland. Such an effort will be reversing the brain drain that Guyana has seen for many decades. So I'd just like to mention also that the Vice President said nothing must affect foreign direct investment. Local content, as the President said also, is not about oil and gas alone, but all other areas. And also we must look at our immigration laws also to reform so that if we have to import, because at some point in time, because of the massive development that's going on in Guyana, all the transformation projects, we may need more workers coming into this country eventually. So it must be done in tandem with looking at our immigration laws. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Honourable Prime Minister, VP Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alistair Routledge. I'm the President of ExxonMobil's Guyana affiliate, which is the operator of the Kanji, Kaitoa and Starboard blocks. Thank you for this opportunity to address you all on this very important issue. Believe me, ExxonMobil has experience from countries all around the world, and indeed some of the other companies that are here with us today who have worked all around the world bring decades and decades of experience of operating in different countries and helping to build local content. It is, as you say, an imperative. It's an imperative for the country that the people not only benefit from the revenues from the resource itself, but also that they benefit from the creation of local content and the building of sustainable capacity in the country. It's not been that many years since oil was first discovered here in Canada, in 2015. But in those 5 years, believe it or not, a lot of progress has already been made. Some really strong foundations. We're not satisfied that we've done everything that we can do, but I think it is important to recognize how much progress has been made by so many people. Just since 2017, we set up the Center for Local Business Development, and in that last 3 years, we've gone from less than 500 Guyanese employed in the industry to over 2,500 employed in the industry. We've been able to grow from less than 100 local Guyanese vendors to more than 800 last year, providing services and goods to the oil and gas sector. Now that is great progress, but this is an important step in moving this forward. So we really appreciate the process that you've embarked upon, the early consultation led by Sham Nokta, the bringing in of the experience from the industry from around the world, and marrying that with the knowledge of what are the capabilities and the realities in the country today. And moving forward, I hope and I am sure the government will continue in this way and really ensure that we have a collaborative approach, because collaboration is critical. We need the industry, not only oil and gas industry, but all the industrial sectors of the country. We need the government. We need the education sector, because there is a lot of capacity building that needs to be done in order to provide the kind of skills and capabilities that will support the oil and gas sector, but also the other ambitions of the government to grow and build a sustainable future, to build the infrastructure, to build the healthcare, the finance sector, which are all critical to the future of the country. So we really welcome this engagement. We look forward to continuing the engagement. As you say, to setting goals that stretch us, targets that motivate us, but are also founded on the realities of where we are today. Those plans need to reflect in a holistic way the National Development Plan so that we don't endanger other parts of the economy. They need to support the development of the country in a competitive way. We're not here to compete with one another in the country, to fight with one another, as the Vice President said. We're here to work together to promote the country, to build capacity, to help employ people, not just for our sector, but for the good and the long term of the country. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to participate with you. And we look forward to continuing this journey, not just this year in the development of the policy, but in the implementation and the ongoing evolution of the local content plans that reflect the progress that we collectively make in building the capacity of the country and building a sustainable development. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Timothy Tucker, Senior Vice President, Georgetown Chamber of Commerce. Mr. President, I compliment you and your government for a very comprehensive local content, a draft local content policy. And I would like to say that it's about time where we get this sort of policy enacted and get it moving towards the development of the local private sector. One of the comments I would like to make is in the policy, in the policy scope, context, and drivers. Notice that government it's indicated that government is one of the largest direct spenders outside of course, the oil company. So the question would be, does the local content draft policy deals with government spending? If government spending will be primarily have a local content to it, we would like to see that the government, that you just don't have a bunch of companies coming in outbidding and outfunding the guy and not having locals being able to involve in government procurement. One of the other things I've noticed, and I would like to ask, is how does the policy deal with the new Small Business Act that was passed last week? I know that the previous act that indicated a 20%. How does the local small businesses, the SMEs, play a part into this policy? Helps to protect them or get them involved in the oil and gas sector. And lastly, it's the review period of the local content draft policy. You notice it's 2 years, and I know that we are starting it up whenever you implement it, and I know we are a growing oil producing nation, and I was thinking that may be too long. So I would just ask those few questions and hope that we get some kind of clarification on them, and then that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Dr. Irfaan Ali, Vice President, Natasha Raskin-Peters, Center for Local Business Development. Mr. President, as well as the Vice President, raised a very critical issue as it relates to access to finance. As Alistair indicated, we have been working through the center to really build the capacity of local Guyanese businesses. I am the present director of the center. Now, one of the issues that the private sector is facing, they have a contract, but the requirement of collateral from the banking institution is really hampering private sector development. And this is something that we would like to bring to the forum to support what Dr. Jagdeo raised. So the issue of really looking at policy as it relates to the oil and gas sector. As indicated, our economy is changing, and we need to grow and to transform and to evolve, especially in this particular area. I would also like to raise the fact that the center would have conducted an economic baseline study that looked at our macroeconomic sectors, so our real external fiscal sectors, monetary sectors, as well as a cost of living study and a competitiveness survey study. We do have a database of over 2,700 plus Guyanese companies that we have been working with in the sector. And so we are happy to collaborate with the ministry in this regard to support the sharing of information, because after all, we want to ensure that our Guyanese companies are able to compete and to continue to win work within the industry. So that sharing of information is open. We are happy to support this policy in any way possible. Thank you.
Your Excellency, President, Honorable Prime Minister, Your Excellency, Vice President, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joachim Vogt. I'm the country manager for Tullow Oil. We are operating the Orunduk block with Eco Atlantic and Total being partners. We also partner on the Repsol managed, operated country block. I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity today. We received at ours this document again last week, and definitely that is a new step forward to what we understand is definitely a way to legislate in a very precise manner local content, and we recognize that perfectly. We would like to express an important point, which is effectively the idea of continued collaboration and ongoing consultations, not to slow down the process, not to hamper it, not to bring up issues, but to have a way where, in a mutual way, between the regulator and the industry, we make sure that the legislative output would effectively be manageable, and so that the industry is effectively capable of delivering what is set as a target in this and that domain. So we very well welcome, and we think also we should develop a stronger work stream, at least for Tullow Oil, because we are yet in the early exploration phase, despite the 2 wells we drilled in 2019. We should develop a stronger work stream on these issues, as exploration is a stop-and-go activity, basically in terms of operations. We would struggle to deliver precisely this kind of targets as they are set here in this document. So I think it would be important that the actual phasing of the local content philosophy that is prevailing here would be perfectly set in order to bring also to the companies, to the oil companies which are in the early exploration phase, sufficient assurance that they are doing the right thing and that they are planning at the right time. Nevertheless, exploration is an activity that is exclusively, it's a bunch of uncertainties which are exclusively driven by projects and short terms. So I would like also to recognize that certainly this is not the first consultation, and this is progress that is today an important point, that since
we started in Guyana these kind of consultations and discussions. We have been witnessing what had been brought to the desk, in particular by the Center of Local Business Development, which I would certainly recommend. We have used it when we could, and this is already a very, very strong tool and very efficient that we hope that this center will be enabled to continue its work so far. So we are very, very open and grateful for this important consultation, and we hope that we will have many more technical engagements so that we can have discussions on the feasibility of the different targets, the timelines, in such a way that things are coherent and are perfectly manageable and deliverable. Thank you very much.
I don't see anyone else. Yes, across here. 1, 2.
Good afternoon. My name is Guillermo Scarra, the CEO of Macor. I just want to make a comment on the training center that was discussed earlier. The company has been working on training initiatives for quite some time in the country, and would like to comment that we will continue to play a role and play our part. We have seen the results of the training in our workforce, and we stand ready to support any initiatives in that area. Thank you. Very good afternoon, everyone. His Excellency. My name is Vish Ramnarayan. I'm representing the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Guyana. In the last round, we would have submitted written representation. In the current draft, we have noted under Section 7 that accounting services is not listed. We at the Institute believe that we are one organization that is well prepared to facilitate any accounting services that this industry would require. All of our licensed members comply with international reporting standards. We have got excellent, well-qualified, trained personnel that operate private schools that have been established for decades. And as such, we appreciate your view that this will be a rolling consultancy project, and as such, we're hoping that we can be added in that list under Section 7. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency, for this opportunity. I am Mohamed Chan from the Manufacturing and Services Association. Firstly, I want to commend the government for taking this initiative in such an aggressive way. And we are also very pleased that our very own president, Sham Nokta, of the Manufacturing Association, has led that charge and was selected for this study. Your Excellency, I think the initial start is commendable, and I've heard yourself and VP mention about competitiveness. And I think just as you have under Section 7 a sliding scale in terms of local content taking a greater part over a 10 years period or more, we wish to review that section further and to provide comments. But to be competitive, I believe, Your Excellency, a good start would be that if you check today's situation, most of our locally manufactured goods and services may not be at a competitive rate internationally. And on sheer pricing, you would not be able to be attractive. So I think just as Section 7 sets out a sliding scale in terms of the local content presence, I think we should also have a sliding scale in terms of cost competitiveness. There must be a degree of tolerance. For example, there could be in the policy a situation that says if you're within a 10% range of international pricing for whatever goods or service, you should be considered. There should be an upper and lower tolerance level for prices, because cost of production, which is something we are still dealing with, and we know that gradually we will be able to address that. But at this current stage, our prices need some bit of support, and we're not talking about subsidizing. We're just talking about having a tolerance level so that at every opportunity, we're not knocked out of the game from the inception because we can't come within, let's say, a 10% range. And we could move that scale gradually back. So we don't always have that freedom of outpricing the international rates. It could start at 10, it could start at 15% range, and as the years go by, we can drop that difference in the prices. So I would like to make that contribution. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excellencies, Prime Minister, Vice President, Ministers of Government. This is Mohamed from the University of Guyana. I'd like to record the presence of the university and also our great thanks for being invited and having been consulted several times on this project. The university has had a long engagement with this process from the very inception, and we are really delighted to see that many of the recent engagements that we've had with the team seem to have borne some good fruit, in that we are named specifically in the document, which is something we were clamoring for a long time. And I also like to indicate that we have given a fairly comprehensive comment in writing, so I won't go into those. But just to point out a few items which I believe might be of importance, and to which the President and Vice President both commented and pointed to this afternoon. First of all, it's the really important aspect of data and monitoring and evaluation, which I feel might be better articulated in the document. The second one is the question of the applicability of protection, and where property and where the definitions of local companies are and where protections are articulated. The third has to do with whether this is a policy or a guidance note, because the cover says it is both policy and guidance note, and sometimes, well, I won't need to go into all of that, but I think if it's a policy, we should say it is a policy, and if it's guidance, it means that people don't necessarily have to follow it, and I don't think that's the intention of what you said. The other question I'd like to reiterate is the banking policy, and how this jives with some of the other smaller bits of legislation and policies that have been coming out within recent times. And I'd like to indicate that the university itself has done quite a bit of work in the last 4 or 5 years. We do have an internal gap analysis on that we would have shared. We do have the energy think tank, and we do have an institute of energy diplomacy, which was never actually announced, but it's there, and it has been working to bolt on certain types of specialist training to those areas that we would have not had anything to do with oil and gas. So for instance, if you were a lawyer and you are looking for a specialization, or an accountant, that institute does that sometimes. And so I really, really would like to congratulate the team that worked on this, and to say thank you very much for uptaking many of our comments. We see it in the document, and we're fairly happy. Anything else we would have written you about. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Honorable Prime Minister, Vice President, Ministers of Government, colleagues all. My name is Leyland Lucas, and I am on the faculty of the School of Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation. at the University of Guyana. I must commend the team on an excellent document which builds on previous work and certainly has done an excellent job of listening to those who have spoken during the consultation period. However, there are a couple of things that I think that we should also take into consideration as an extension of this local content policy. One of those things, I think, is beginning to look at a restructuring of the finance system. If new businesses are to emerge and be successful, then I do not think that within the current financing framework that many of them will receive the resources that they need. And so I think as a nation, we need to give serious consideration to expanding the finance system, not only in terms of institutions, but also in terms of the kinds of items, funding options that are available. Venture capitalists, angel investing, finding ways to begin to embrace those aspects into our financing system so that we can attract the resources that are necessary so that new businesses can emerge and be successful. I also think it's important that we pay very close attention to the diaspora, where there is a wealth of knowledge and resources available, and begin to look at how do we further embrace them so that they can become very active players in the local content framework. I heard one of my colleagues express his concern about the loss of human capital to some of the other companies. Unfortunately, it's a consequence of operating in a free enterprise system where resources will go in the direction that pays them well. But I would also ask that we use that as an opportunity to start a conversation about building capacity and building it quickly, so that as resources move away from one sector of the economy, they can be replaced through strong programs of building human capital. I'd also like us to give consideration to creating incentives so that we can begin to have some of these businesses being located away from the common corridors that we see them being located along. And so what incentives may we create that a business that is involved in local content chooses to be relocated in another region rather than one that is in close proximity to where the activities are actually occurring and therefore can continue to benefit from so. I think those are the points I'd like to make at this point in time, and I will continue as part of this engagement and as part of this country to offer any thoughts I can to ensure that we can develop as a nation. Thank you.
Mr. President, members of government, I'm Dr. Krishna Durga from Action Invest. We're a member of several business support organizations, including the Manufacturing Association. I wanted to highlight several areas, and I'll make a formal submission that will cover many of those areas, but some key ones are also the change in culture that we'll need in our country. Oil and gas can be seen as a project like any other area, and for a project, we seek to address the full scope, the quality that's needed, competitive pricing, delivering on time. And for a very long time, businesses in Guyana have really been focused on delivering at the lowest cost. Even from the public sector and private sector, we continue to reward as a large part of the criteria, doing the job at the lowest cost. And we can see even from the government, in many cases, mention being made of contracts not being delivered on, not being delivered at the level of quality that's needed and within the time frame. So that does require a significant shift in the level of the culture which we operate in terms of delivering the quality that's needed. Another key area as well is that based on the studies I've seen, nearly 80% of the economic benefit will actually go directly to the government of Guyana's Natural Resources Fund via royalties and profit sharing. So we also need to keep in mind that we would want this industry to operate as efficiently as possible, because the more efficient it operates, the larger share of profit goes to, the portion that the government will receive. And from that aspect, a significant amount will also be put into the budget. So similarly, we would also, as a private sector, want to know clearly how do we prepare our companies to be able to participate in government-funded projects, so that we can also be up to par when it comes to that. The improvements that also need to be made from a skills perspective in the public sector, because many of our companies, we depend heavily on government services, so the level of upgrades that we need to do from our own skills base will need to be supported from the public sector as well. We do talk about the labor needs in the future, but there are many databases already in place, such as GCOM, GRA, NIS, CLBD, to really understand what our current labor profile is and what the future demand is going to be. Just when it comes to taxation specific, many of the large investors are benefiting from significant waivers in their taxation. In Guyana, our non-commercial companies, especially manufacturing, benefit from a 25% tax rate, as opposed to trading companies which import goods and being taxed at 40%. However, we have nearly or more than 40% of our GDP right now is in services, and it's much easier to set up a service-based company, local or foreign, but there is no protection at the moment for service-based companies, which are all taxed at 25%. So to give some consideration as well to local service-based companies having maybe a lower tax rate than foreign service-based companies, because at the moment it puts us on the same playing field, and it's not always that easy to compete there. And then education specific as well. I know that one of the really good moves was removing corporate taxes on education providers. But at the moment, it seems like the agencies that have to put this in place think that it only applies to primary and secondary education, when really, based on the budget speech back then, it seemed to imply that this was really meant to improve education at all levels. Looking at ways in which we can also retain our graduates. We have an abundance of land. We understand that the government wants to issue nearly 10,000 lots per year. Maybe our graduates as well, together with the university degree, could be eligible for a lot as well that can maybe even keep them here in Guyana. And just finally, the Natural Resources Fund, we speak about financing as well. And many countries use part of their Natural Resources Fund as a rainy day fund, or they invest it elsewhere. We actually have an ideal opportunity in Guyana to take part of that funding to be able to actually use it in the form of a development bank for our local companies to be able to borrow at competitive rates with less risk-averse measures that the existing commercial banks have in place. And maybe lastly, we currently still pay a 50% excise tax on our current fuel imports. So on the one hand, like we've done with many industries for many years, we have exported our raw materials only to import back finished products. We do have an opportunity with this particular industry to move to a space where we can actually refine our own oil. And again, there are many other industries that would spin off from that. But it would also safeguard us from still having to pay that 50% excise tax when we are importing fuel now. I think just our neighbor has been doing that for nearly 40 years as well to their benefit. And even our Guy Oil, our state oil company, it might be an opportunity for that company as well to really elevate the way it does business. There are several other recommendations which I'll make a formal submission on. Thank you.
May I just urge colleagues, though, just because there are lots of issues we can raise here, and a lot of them are not directly related to the subject at hand. A lot of those comments relate more to the budget and all of that, how we approach it. But if we can get more comments on definitions, sectors, that sort of thing, rather than, the more generalized discussion. We already know that we have to train more people. That's what we're here for. It's all in the document about all the areas we have to work on. But the sector participants need to share their assessment of the sectors. For example, insurance. Is it realistic to pass any of the insurance business to our local insurance industry? Does it have any capacity whatsoever? And how do you do it? The mechanism for doing this so that it doesn't become unrealistic. Because most of the sectors that are being mentioned are already part of the documents that we're looking at, training, etc., and stuff like that, financing. So if we can get some more comments along those lines from the people who are like accounting, and accounting definitely would be one of the areas. That's why we asked the ministry to disaggregate. The first draft came in a general form that was submitted to us, and we said, now we have to go to sector-specific targets, and of course realistic targets, but sector-specific. It can be a generalized thing. So if we can get some more comments along those lines, it would help us to move the document and the finalization of the document forward. That wasn't meant to kill the presentations, but it just, hopefully we can get a bit more focus. And then, President would have a lot of things to comment on. But Alistair, 800 companies, you said, big progress. But what share is it of total expenditure? It doesn't make sense if you have 2,700 companies in this Center for Business Development database. How many have actually really been getting work? And how much all those baseline studies I've heard, they're already done differently by the Ministry of Finance. So why duplicate them again? A lot of the money and it's a great effort, I know Exxon probably wants to do business development, and they've done this in other countries. But we are not other countries. And we don't want the money to be wasted on things that we've already done. You can go over to the Ministry of Finance, get a competitiveness study, the macro studies. We've done this before, rather than spend money and doing that. And a lot of the money given to some NGOs too, it goes towards admin expenses. A lot of it doesn't really go into training people, producing welders and fabricators and guys who can actually bring in someone to work with the local people if they're building apartments to rent, to say, these are the standards you have to build to. That is what matters. That helps people to actually do things where when they come to you, you can say, yes, I can rent this building. Well, it meets my standards. That's where we need to evolve to really practical ways of having local content, not just the studies and spending money on admin and stuff like that. But that's something we've discussed before, and it's not meant as a criticism or so, but we have to evolve to that. That's how you really get things going. You really get things going. So yes, we're still open, yes.
Clinton Williams. Well, today, Shipping Association. Excellency, Vice President, Prime Minister, it is a fact that our oil and gas sector is preeminently maritime based. And for the longest while, it will continue to be maritime sector developed. Our maritime sector in Guyana, as you're aware, is very much in the embryonic stages. whether we're talking about shore-based facilities, whether we're talking about dredging the rivers, whether we're talking about the nautical skills, whether we're talking about those hard skills like welding and fabrication, whether we're talking about warehousing facilities, and in this case, warehousing facilities in relation to those hazardous chemicals we utilize for the sector. What I'm trying to get at is that we have done some work, been doing some work in the Shipping Association in relation to a strategic plan that would incorporate, among other things, how to deal with a lot of these issues. And I believe that aligning what we have come up with so far with what perhaps can be included or otherwise be part and parcel of global content initiatives will in fact make for some complementary strengthening of the document and try and elicit, as it were, some interventions and some initiatives that will get us there in a way that makes sense insofar as prioritizing these issues are concerned. For example, another hat, we have found out, based on the demand for some of the major subcontractors, there are welders or electricians are not necessarily competent enough to deliver. And so we decided that we have to ensure that we have enough capacity to do that. Not only provide or produce welders and fabricators, but to do them at some proficiency and competency level that would make them relevant and usable in the oil and gas sector and beyond that. So not to ramble on, there is a document that we're completing at the moment, and what we'll probably do is to try and align that with the local content document that is currently on the table here and see to what extent we can incorporate some of those interventions that we are indicating is necessary. And there are many. I mean, whether we're talking about pilotage or whether we're talking about the hard skills, whether we're talking about deep water harbor, whatever we're talking about, dredging, a whole range of issues that will make us responsive to what is required in this, to me, heavily biased maritime sector development initiative. So we'll come back to you with those issues and so best put online also to respect.
If I may, Honourable Vice President, just come back on a couple of points that you raised. First of all, I think we need to take offline some of the specifics, but by way of example, to looking at the realities of today and how much of the expenditure that we make, it can realistically be brought into the country over a period of time. I noted that there was some targets that were laid out, some draft targets around plate steel, for example. As you well know, there is no steel manufacturing in the country. So we need to collaborate with you to understand what is the national development plan, what's the vision for the country. Does the country want to manufacture, to make steel? And if so, on what time horizon, and we can collaborate.
Yes, I know some of the targets here, so you can submit those that they're just taken from somewhere. And frankly speaking, if we're not producing steel, we can set some of the targets, etc. So I've scanned those too. That is why right at the beginning I said this has to go through several iterations before we come up with a final document, because these were just, if it's unrealistic and it's going to be even a service to provide it in Ghana will be 15-20% higher than the comparable service imported, and that's part funded in it from cost oil, then may not make sense. And so this has to go through several iterations, because you may find those, and we'd welcome in writing a lot of those, because in every sector, if you can't do it today. So that's, don't worry too much about the steel plates. We're more worried about the rental and the headquarters and stuff like that. We want you to rent from Guyanese, not build the headquarter. That's the sort of thing we're more concerned about. Okay.
Hello. Excellency, Vice President and other ministers, thank you very much for the opportunity today. I decided to come this afternoon more to lend support to a document which I feel was well thought out, but I will now follow up after listening to the comments of the Vice President because I feel energized. I am pretty sure that I think the one thing that a common man is missing from this document, if you may please oblige me, is that I am confident that 70% of us in this room, I'm talking about the businessmen, are quite unaware as to how to communicate to seize on those opportunities that are present for local companies. So I would like to ask that some form of communication be present in the policy to make it more transparent, because we Guyanese are very ambitious. We Guyanese, we seize opportunities. And let me use the example of Lilauti in Mibukuri. And she has a big Bora farm, but she wants to seize on an opportunity that might be available. Should she go take a drink with Alistair at the cocktail function, and this might be the opportunity? Or can she go, is it a center for local business development? So I think we have a virgin opportunity now with this policy to incorporate a little bit more transparency and opportunities for how to seize those within the local content policy. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, honorable members of Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Beni Karan, and I am here participating in my capacity as a representative of CNOC Petroleum Guyana Limited. CNOC fully supports the government and people of Guyana and their desire to develop a local content policy that would maximize the participation of local entities in the oil and gas sector. CNOC is pleased to be part and parcel of this local content initiative and is looking forward to playing a collaborative and constructive role in this consultative process. In all of its operations internationally, CNOC fully recognizes universally accepted principles governing local content development. Accordingly, CNOC is considering Guyana's local content policy guidance document with a positive approach and constructive spirit. In this regard, we support the sentiments expressed by Exxon in their capacity as operator, since the Routledge's presentation earlier today. With regard to the specific measures that have been outlined with the document, CNOC Limited is in the process of considering the practical effects of these proposals. A common element found in countries that have achieved high levels of local content in their industries is the development of an implementation plan based on an understanding of the capabilities and on realistic forecasting to develop industrial sectors that are well targeted, as well as employment opportunities for sustained long-term growth. As Guyana develops this plan, we are confident that our experiences and resources can assist in these deliberations in order to achieve stewardship over its local content policies without compromising the efficiency of ongoing project execution and operations. CNOC hopes to be able to contribute to the final outcome based upon experience with local content in other parts of the world, and more so in a manner that would help to avoid pitfalls and to ensure attainable outcomes for local stakeholders. Thank you.
I just want to make a comment. I think we were going to a nice place just now with Alistair and the Vice President. I like this issue of target setting. So and this is, I think, where the Vice President wants the discussion to go to. How do we establish fair targets, achievable targets? That's very important. I think Alistair raised an important point by giving an example. But I just want to switch the equation a bit. Whilst the government will set targets, I think the operators, so this is not just about Exxon, the operators must be brought to a forum in which they say, this is our requirement over the next 20 years. These are the areas that we will have services that we will need. And we're giving a commitment that once the support mechanism is built, so that local companies, in whatever shape, whether consortiums, can build their capacity and be competitive, then you have a commitment from us that we will drive this business to the local developers. I think it's a two-way equation, because if the opportunity is there, and the local private sector knows that the opportunity is there, and if they build their capacity, become competitive, then that opportunity will migrate to them, then we can have a happy outcome. But one of the things is that there is no commitment that if they build that capacity, it will migrate to them. So I think that is where we have to arrive at as part of the local content too. In the medium to long term, these are the areas, so the government also will support, the private sector will build the capacity, and there's a commitment by the operators that those services will migrate to the local environment in whatever shape or form, whether it's consortium and so on. So I think it's a place that brings everyone on the table, the government, the private sector, and the operators, to set that agenda. Separate, and it's very important. I'm very happy that the Vice President actually drove the discussion to that, to set that agenda. So we all leave the room knowing that in 10 years, we need this facility, and we're committing that once you have this facility, and these are the standards that you have to meet, those business opportunity comes your way. That is target, that is achievable, and that drives the bid. And it's important for us too. It is important for us in the government, because most of the investors locally and regionally who come to you say, yes, a deep water facility. I'm just giving you an example. But how do we ensure that what is done in Texas comes here? What is done in Trinidad comes here? Where is that commitment coming from? And we're at a happy place today, because from what I hear from you, Alistair, we're willing to have that discussion and that commitment. Once as the Vice President said, the operative thing is competitiveness, because you have to view it reality and what that competitiveness is. That's just what I wanted to add.
If I could make a contribution based on the discussion, not as the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, but as an owner and an investor into a small welding and fabrication startup called Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services. Recently, one of the projects that we just won is the projects to do the ladders for the prosperity. And our most recent project was the setup of the piping and electricals for Halliburton's largest regional mud plant. Let me characterize something that the evaluator from one of the tier 1s said when he came to meet us to do further evaluation before moving ahead. He was very surprised at the capabilities in country, and he thinks that Guyana really has the potential to grow further
with the right nurturing and really growing its capacity to steel working. But critical to that is certain things that ride along with the local content policy, and that is tax administration. For instance, one of our first projects, when we embarked on that, we had to absorb the 14% value-added tax because the subcontractor that we were supplying to basically used the PSA and said, based on the PSA, and that this is specific equipment, we do not pay value-added tax. I had to absorb that into my margins because my nearest competitor, regionally, I won't specify countries, but they wouldn't pay value-added tax on export, and then the operator won't pay value-added tax on import. So I had to adjust both my pricings as well as absorb any value-added tax I paid on materials, particularly steel. I had to import the steel because the steel, and I'm a unique individual because I'm also a steel stockist. So I'm both a stockist and now a service provider in steel working. In country, in Guyana, we've traditionally stocked steel for buildings and the sugar industry. No plates thicker than about 1 inch and 1.5 inches. We had to get plates that are about 2 inch thick to basically make this framework. And we had to import that from the nearest stocking point, which was Trinidad. I paid value-added tax on that steel coming in. The tax administration needs to have some way of dealing with startup companies in the oil and gas industry because we're paying a tax that our competitors do not pay, and that is value-added tax on the products and services. So silent in this policy is the need to streamline the tax administration with that. Several questions that have been raised here. We intend to respond to them, and I got a lot have been coming in on the live feed and stuff like that. At some point in time, we'd assess everything that was raised here and try to address those moving forward. Without, for example, location, about locating, value-added businesses in different regions, tax waivers, etc. Already we have some of that. For if you locate in some regions, you get enhanced concessions, tax concessions. That could be extended for the oil and gas industry. The Procurement Act that was raised, but that's a little bit outside of the oil and gas, but generally in the Procurement Act, there is a margin of preference for local companies. That was never really put in place, but we are now thinking about pre-qualifying local contractors, just very small ones, and below a certain level, maybe $5 million, just to stimulate more startups. They will then have a simplified form of tendering with almost the tender document sold to them, so they just have to tick, like, yes, I have the capacity, no, I don't have, etc. Very simplified form, so that we can incubate more contractors, because we have a really difficult time now finding a lot of contractors, even for civil works in government. The other thing about keep the margin of preference for local companies in the PSIP, the Public Sector Investment Program, is some of those are funded by different agencies. So if it's a Chinese loan or it's an Indian line of credit or the US line of credit, there's a requirement that you select contractors from those countries. If you use funding from the multilaterals, you have to go to open competitive bidding, international bidding. But the bulk of the local expenditure will go to local companies already. So that's not a problem. But there are those requirements that we can't bypass in the PSIP. The skill switching, if we listen to what Maniram said, then we don't need to develop the entire sector, because we can't just, we know that might be normal, that you would have a migration of skilled people from the other sectors into the oil and gas sector, particularly if it pays more. That's a mobility of labor. The solution to that is not necessarily bringing in more people. It is training more. And that is why such a big emphasis on training, massive emphasis on training. Of the 4,500 scholarships that we budgeted for this year, a significant part of it will be done in Germany through a German university, a technical college, and it's training people in technical skills. President has spoken about the need for skills training here, even Oil and Gas Institute, possibility of that, but big emphasis. And this is why we're saying to the companies, and this is if they want the help, bring in the people who can do the certification, hold a class here of 50 welders, if that's the biggest skill, get the people certified, and then you solve a problem and you create more job opportunities. So very practical approach, and the state has set aside some money for this, but this is where we'd like to see resources from the companies evolve into, rather than studies and business incubation development. The government can only set the rules. Some people were making so many comments as though the government should invest. The government is trying to set the rules, a fairer policy environment for local people to succeed. But that's not taking away initiative from them. So they have to do some of the heavy lifting. We're just creating the policy environment and the conditions under which they would have more opportunities. And we're trying to work with the oil companies to carve out more opportunities for them in certain sectors. We can't do it by building FPSOs, we know that, or manufacture steel, but we can, as I said before, definitely there are lots of other things we can do that currently are not coming to Guyanese or are going through subcontractors to Guyanese, where they're placed at a disadvantage. They can come directly with minimal help to Guyanese companies, etc. So we're not going to displace the private sector, just focusing on creating the conditions. Things like the cost of capital, that's a big hurdle for companies here, compared to the cost of capital to people that they're competing against. And so definitely to level that playing field, it requires some more work. Already we're looking at expanding the breadth, the depth of our financial system, the point you made. I know a few applications in now for the central bank for new merchant banks, and they're being examined now. They're non-depository taking institutions, so they don't put depositors' money at risk, Guyanese. So we can be a little bit more liberal once they complete the due diligence. The central bank does that in getting those, so you can have more, because our stock market not going to, in the near term, it's not going to provide much resources there. Too few public companies. So we're actually actively looking at that now. The diaspora, definitely, they will form part of this, the definition of local content. You know, once you're born to Guyanese parentage, or even your grandparents, Guyanese, etc., then you definitely, you'll be able to qualify, we think, on the local content policy. Diaspora, definitely along those lines. So these are some of the things. I don't know, margins of preference, we have to look at that too, but they can't be to the extent that they push up the cost, because we want to lower Exxon's cost. To the extent we lower their cost, we have more money for profit oil. And that is why, we believe in the long run too. If there is a differential in pricing for labor and others, this must accrue to the benefit of the company and the country, not to a subcontractor. So that if you can help to build local capacity, and you can get a welder who is just as good and certified as a welder from another country but charges you $10 an hour versus $20 an hour, who benefits if we directly contract them? The company, because there'll be more for profit oil, and they'll share bigger share, and the state too. And then you satisfy three objectives. The company makes more profit, the government gets more revenue, and you have a local person doing the work. So that differential could be captured through lowering the cost oil and greater profit margin. So we believe this is not a battle with each other, the companies, etc. And we don't want to. We may definitely have to separate exploration phase versus production phase, because in exploration there may be more limited, possibility of local content. So we look at all of those things together, and with the companies to come with targets that our local guys can meet and grow into, and over time get a bigger share of the market. So I don't know. This is an ongoing task. Today is the first basically public consultation, but you've already had lots of consultations on this issue. It will go on for the next month, and we want to ask the sectors themselves, the insurance sector, to meet and realistically come up with an assessment. Almost each of those sectors, the accounting guys, auditing capabilities. Do they have capability to do this sort of work? And therefore, partnerships, etc. And then we'll meet with the oil companies, meet back with the private sector before we move forward. We don't want to put out a document that's totally unrealistic. Nobody can meet the targets. But we're definitely going to be tough on ensuring that more, because we've already seen that just with a change of approach by some of the oil companies, that in how they contract the work. And the point made by the president is predictability. Who invests if unless there is some predictability, they'll get work? So the companies need to define their work and make a clear commitment. Once standards are met, the people will get the work. So that sort of thing is also important. So if there is no further comment on this, we'd like to thank you very much. I don't know, the President, you want to have a final word?
No, I just want to thank everyone too, but just one comment on my friend from the School of Entrepreneurship made a very important point too, which is a change of business culture. I'll give you an example. A very senior banking executive once told me a story of a Guyanese investor who was going to build a massive project, and turned up at the bank, and the bank asked him, who's your designer? He said, me. Who's your engineer? He said, me. Who's supervising the project? He said, me. So you have to understand that you're operating in a different environment, and you have to invest too in what is required to operate in that environment. So you're right. We have to build a new attitude, the standards has to be different, the way we operate, the way we build our business model, all of this has to reflect the changes. So I just want to join the Vice President in thanking you and pass the
But thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And as I said before, this is just the beginning of the engagements. You'd have more, probably in smaller groups, other forms of engagement. The ministry and Minister Vikram Barrett would lead those engagements, and then we will move to wrapping up the document. Thank you very much.
I